Welcome to the Hospitality Mavericks podcast with me, Michael Tingser. We at Hospitality Mavericks are here to inspire leaders to create heart-centered and profitable businesses from the inside out, the kind that both employees and customers love and support. This episode was my first face-to-face conversation since lockdown started. And I was very lucky to pick up some time with the very caring operator, Edd Heller, the founder of Ethicurean Guild, which operate a number of kitchens across Brighton. And they are on a mission to do more than just make profit, but do good through food. Edd tells how they responded to the pandemic by helping raising money and making food for people in need across Brighton. He tells us they right now have fed more than 100,000 people since lockdown started. Isn't that just incredible and amazing? He also gives us a clear understanding on how you put people first and how this is the only way to build a business you can be really proud of and have long-term success with. We also discussed the pros and cons of the Eat Out scheme from an independent point of view. Edd also gives his recipe for bouncing back and what he thinks the future looks like for independent restaurants. Edd will make you rethink things, and he has some super insight and advice. So grab headphones, coffee, notebook, and enjoy. Today we are out doing our first face-to-face interview since lockdown, and I've been very excited about that. So excited that we struggled getting started a bit because I just had to get around the technology again. But hey ho, that's how to go. But we actually gone out locally in Brighton, and we are meeting a local operator and somebody that has been working all the way through lockdown and done some amazing things to help people out there, both people that's homeless, but also other people in hospitality. And Edd, he can tell that story in a minute. And we're going to be talking about a lot of other things, the Eat Out scheme, what it means for a local operator, the special model he runs by running in pubs and so on. But Edd, he will tell more about that. So welcome to the podcast, Edd.
Thank you.
And Edd, we met a couple of months ago on Twitter because you were at that point you were tweeting about all the good you were doing to help feeding people. We'll come back to that in a second. But for the people that don't know who Edd is, if they're not from Brighton and haven't seen you on Twitter, where you have some very strong opinions, or say it's dare to be different opinions, or what I call a maverick opinion about things. Who is Edd, and how do you ended up in hospitality, and where are you now with your business?
Okay. Oh gosh, where to start? I actually came to hospitality quite late in my life, probably only about 6 years ago, when I ended up running franchise here in Brighton in a pub. It wasn't too long before I shifted to a head chef position in the village where I live in Hampshire. We achieved a Michelin Bib Gourmand, an AA Rosette. I moved on from there to another kitchen. We achieved 2 Rosettes, good food guide reviews and such. I ended up running an English vineyard, fine dine restaurant and wedding venue. But I was drawn back to Brighton about 2 years ago after freelance chefing around the UK. And we've come back to Brighton to operate what locally is known as the franchise model. It just gives me a lot of food freedom, an ability to run my own business, put my own stamp on things, but from within the security of other businesses.
Yeah, so you run kitchens for the audience out there within pubs.
That's right, yes.
Yeah.
It's locally known as a kitchen franchise situation. I'm not sure if that's the best way of describing it, a franchise. We're not taking on someone else's brand. I look at us as a food management company. We're a catering firm that comes in and we manage the food operations as a third-party company. So a pub will say to us, here is our kitchen. I'll say thank you very much. We put our own staff in, we write our own menus, we do our own ordering, our own marketing. But from a customer point of view, for all intent and purpose, they wouldn't even know that there's a separate team. It's just a pub they go to eat. And we just happen to fulfill the back of house duties.
And prior to, you said 6 years ago, you were into the hospitality journey. So that's not many years then being owning. But what did you do prior to that? Because you have a background within business.
Yeah, I mean, I've had sort of small businesses before. I worked a lot in marketing and public relations at a point. Nothing like hospitality, really. I'm very politically minded at times, that people might grasp from my Twitter feed, but nothing that would strike out as a full-blown career like hospitality is.
And what made you, because like most people say that, hospitality is the kind of thing you run into in a very young age and it grows on you, and I did that myself and many have that journey, but what at that point in your life, what made you shift into hospitality, and what was it that attracted you? Because again, that's a massive career shift from marketing to...
No, absolutely. I suppose opportunity, want of a different pace of life. If I knew what I know now 6 years ago, I would have probably sat myself down and had a word about that. But it is, and hospitality has got to be one of the most welcoming, inviting, rewarding industries that we have here in the UK. Okay, it's not without sin. There are incredibly long hours. There is low pay to contend with in certain areas. There's a lot of inequality that exists amongst hospitality employees. But it is a wonderful industry, and the people within it are like second families to their colleagues. So in that sense, I think it does have an amazing sort of an amazing ability to attract people.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. It's a bit of some of my friends we've been in our life. I talked with one here this morning. We called it the drug. You can't just go out of it. He's been trying over a couple of years, doing some other things. He always end back in some kind of way into hospitality. So you're right about it. Either you have it or not. And I have similar conversation with my friends I grew up with as well.
Yes.
And how many franchises do you operate as it is in the moment in the Brighton area?
I operate 3 franchises. I operate a further site that's not a franchise, but I co-operate a site on the outskirts of Brighton. And I have a catering team that was during lockdown, but still providing food assistance to homeless rough sleepers across the city.
Yeah. And what happened when the lockdown hit your business? Because there has been, there's a crazy period, but if you just go quickly back and assess that, because I think that's very important to why we sit here today. So the 15th of March to the 18th of March, that's where for most people a lot of closing down started.
There was. We noticed a distinct drop off in trade. We could have gone in one of our sites from a £6,000 week down to a £1,000 week, where customers weren't sure whether they should or shouldn't come in. Has the government told us to shut, leave, not go in? And no one was quite sure. There was a lot of uncertainty. It was quite a stressful time for the industry, not knowing how you were going to operate, what was going to happen. And then the government obviously made the decision that we were to shut. So of course we did. I'd say for the first 2 weeks of lockdown, I probably had exactly the same experience as 95% of the UK. I'd get up in the morning and make my wife breakfast from scratch, some little English muffins, we'd cure some bacon, we'd cook a nice little breakfast, and as we were finishing that, I'd say to her, what do you fancy for lunch? And I'd sit there from about 9 o'clock in the morning, scratch making lunch and into dinner. And we ate like kings for the first few weeks. And then I get a phone call one day saying, Ed, there's some homeless people in Brighton. Are any of your kitchens open? And for the last 18 months, we've actually been supplying and donating food to the severe weather emergency protocol centres in Brighton. So when there's incredibly low temperatures and they shelter extra homeless people overnight, extra rough sleepers, we provide the food for that, which could be anything from 20, 30 meals up to 60, 80 meals a night for them. So we had a history of doing it, and that they asked the question and we said, yeah, we can open a kitchen for it. It's not a problem. How many meals do you need tonight? Well, it could be up to 150. A little bit of bat and ball back and forth over the next week. We finally got the go-ahead to start cooking, and our numbers were 291. 291 rough sleepers being housed in hotels around Brighton. And we put together a team that started cooking. We cooked a hot meal every single day for them, 7 days a week. Another part of the team fulfilled breakfast and brunch packs. And that went on without a break through lockdown. It meant that we didn't actually furlough any of our staff. It meant that we kept our teams together, kept them cooking. And it meant that they actually had a real positive impact, not just for the homeless. We produced nearly 15,000 meals for frontline NHS nurses working on COVID wards. We put together meals for food banks through churches and through job centres. Anyone that essentially needed feeding, if we had the capacity to, we'd generate meals for them. We're very, very lucky that the council have now approved extra funding to take that through until the end of the year. So we're incredibly, not grateful, but we're incredibly humbled to be part of this experience, that we're making such a positive impact on people's lives at the moment. Again, not without challenges. Come the 4th of July, we reopened. So chefs would leave kitchens and go back to our original kitchens. But we still have a team working 7 days a week in Brighton, still feeding people.
Still feeding people. How many meals in total are we up on?
I stopped counting weeks ago, about 85,000. I'd imagine now we're probably knocking on for around the 100,000 meal mark.
Wow. Wow. And amazing. Well done.
Thank you. Not letting up though. There's still plenty of food poverty in Brighton.
What was it that ticked that in you to just know straight away, I need to do that? Of course, we need to help people. There must have been something like, okay, this is what we just need to go and do.
Well, I think as a chef, I have this part of me that just needs to feed people. People come into the restaurant or into the pub to eat, and if they're looking at a menu and they're not sure, and you just want to feed people. Yeah. I think that's part of it. A friend of mine, Fiona, describes it as the Jewish mother in someone. She is a Jewish mother herself and feeds like there's no tomorrow. And it's that, I think there's a natural part of some people that just need to feed and nourish people. If they asked the question, it was a no-brainer. Of course, we were going to step up, and my staff said the same even before we even got the phone call. My youngest member of staff, Joe, he's just turned 19, at university studying a business management degree. And he said, I'm not going to go home to Exeter. I'm going to stay in Brighton. And if you need help feeding the homeless, as and when that happens, I'm going to be here to do that. So I'm incredibly blessed to have good people.
And what did this, you said that it was, first of all, the people who got the food, that's amazing for them. And, they didn't get hungry. But also I saw on Twitter you were helping people that was in a food crisis if they lost their job in hospitality early on in the pandemic. How did that come along, and how did you find out there's actually people here that's worked in the front line that suddenly, barely can pay the rent and feed themselves?
I think that it's a very obvious thing in hospitality that there was a real threat that if people didn't come back to dine with us and to drink with us, that we were going to have to face a real possibility of making redundancies. Margins in hospitality are incredibly tight, with VAT sitting at 20% and not reclaimable on food items. It's a really tough industry to make your margin, and the difference between 20 empty seats and 10 or 40, whichever way we go, that's the difference between hiring and firing and making people redundant. So with sites choosing not to reopen, there was always going to be high levels of redundancy, unemployment, and potentially food poverty. And again, going back to the wonderful people in hospitality, when we started this project feeding people, we put a shout out and just said, look, if there's a spare chef that can give us a push or someone that can come in and help us box, let me know. And it was amazing. Everyone that stepped up came from the hospitality companies around Brighton that probably operated a stone's throw from where I operate some of my sites. People I'd known previously, people I hadn't known, but all people that would come in 5 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week, unpaid as volunteers, just if need be, decant fruit from a delivery and store it in a fridge. They gave their time without question just to turn up and be part of something. So I knew that if there was a possibility that some of these people could lose their jobs, I felt that we kind of had a moral obligation to actually repay that favour. They've been incredible. So we put out a tweet, which is how you and I first interacted, that said that I know it's a really tough time at the moment, but I don't want anyone to feel that they're ever in a situation where they won't have food in their stomach. That's the most upsetting thing, not as a chef, but as a human being, that someone's going hungry. I've got kitchens, I've got staff. I'm fortunate enough to still be open. So if you're hungry, please come down and we will feed you. No questions asked.
And what did it mean for your staff to be part of that? And when you came back and opened on the 4th of July, have this brought you closer together, I guess, because suddenly it's a different mission than just getting a business running?
I've always been incredibly lucky to have really good staff. We invest really heavily in their welfare, for instance. We try to promote 4-day working weeks. I appreciate the long hours in kitchens. So we try and give people 3 days off a week. It's not always possible. People might be sick. There might be holiday day. There could be any reason. But as a typical rule of thumb, a 4-day week, we pay even our KPs living Brighton wage at a minimum. We give them opportunities outside of the work environment on a paid for basis. So a few weeks ago, we took our staff down to Brighton seafront to do the litter pick with Surfers Against Sewage. If they want the extra hours on a 5th day, they can go down to the project and they can feed homeless people for a day. They can produce meals for food banks to give them a bit of a better balance. We have an incredibly talented chef with us at the moment called Alex. She was actually a biomedical scientist until she decided for a career change, so it's not just me. Mm-hmm. She completed college. She went to work at a local restaurant that had a couple of rosettes. She's incredibly talented, more so than she even realises. And I appreciate the food she's cooking with us at the moment probably doesn't actually stretch her. So we're arranging for her to go and do stage in other restaurants of chefs that I know that will challenge her and she will learn. So we try and invest really heavily in our staff. So we've always had a really good team. And yeah, nothing was more apparent than when we asked them, don't go on furlough. Don't sit at home doing nothing, sitting in your garden, sunbathing. Come in, work 8 hours a day over a stove and feed some people, please. And not one of them said no. They all came in. So we've always had that really tight-knit team where we appreciate that sometimes there's a bigger story than just service. Yeah.
And how have it, from a business point of view, you've been doing this together, working together with different organizations, founding funding. How, from a business point of view, being through all this and then now trying to come back, how has that affected you, and how are you trying to bounce back now into normal business gear?
Yes. I suppose my time personally is still quite divided. Again, I'm fortunate enough to have an amazing team. So the Homeless Project, I have a chef called Lindsay, a great chef. She's from an events catering background, which sadly means for her at the moment there is no work because there's no weddings. So for Lindsay, we've managed to give her work, which is great for Lindsay, someone that's not having to claim benefits. And for me, I have someone that's absolutely amazing, sort of heading up that kitchen for me, but trying to balance the responsibility of feeding these people whilst reopening businesses that rightly deserve my entire attention and focus. It's a lot of early mornings and a lot of late nights, but we've just about got there.
Yeah. And how it's been coming back? How's the first, what are we in, 7 weeks in now, six, almost 7 weeks into trading since the 4th of July?
They've been a bit of a roller coaster. Not knowing has been the hardest thing. Government guidelines were a little bit vague, sometimes a little bit sudden. It's meant a lot of trying to do what you feel is best to protect your staff and to protect your customers. There's a lot of discrepancy across the entire industry. I ate out somewhere the other day with my children, and whilst they had an app to stop me having to have a waitress at my table, there was no PPE to be seen anywhere, not worn by staff. They still came to our table to deliver food, drinks, clear table checks. Compared to some sites, like some of ours, you'll come in, you'll have your temperature taken. You'll sign in on a log so we can track and trace you. So all these things sort of contending with, as well as trying to relaunch a business that you don't know if it's going to survive. You don't know if people's buying habits have changed. People's inner fear about the virus, is that playing a part? So I have a site which I've been using as a benchmark, really, which is the Prince George on Trafalgar Street. We have a little vegetarian vegan kitchen down there that does a relatively consistent level of trade. Our first week reopening, we were down about 90%. That's not 19, that's 90. That's quite a scary number to be down. And of course, we'd fully staffed. We didn't know if we were busy or quiet. So I've got staff in my kitchen to operate at 100%, and we're operating at 90. So 90% loss. Week 2, we clawed it back a little, maybe 65% down. Didn't really pick up significantly until the start of August for the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. That made a bit of a difference, not immediately though. We noticed that our weekend trade shifted from the weekend to the early part of the week, for instance. Yeah. We'd have Mondays, Tuesdays and Wednesdays that felt like Fridays, Saturdays and Sundays. And then we'd get through to Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and they'd feel like Mondays, Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Which was, again, as a business, incredibly hard to predict and to staff for. It made it a real challenge. Eat Out has settled down a bit, not in terms of the level of trade we're doing, but Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays have picked up again now. I'd say that George now is maybe operating 10% beneath what it did on last year. Which isn't a bad position to be in, considering that it's only been open 6 weeks. Yeah. We're still in the middle of a pandemic, and that people are still being naturally cautious. So the Eat Out scheme has encouraged people to come back out. Whether or not that's given them a new belief that actually, look, if we can do it on a Monday, we can do it on a Friday, it is safe. Yeah. I don't know, but it has definitely helped. In general. We'll see how we go into September. There were rumours that it might potentially be extended. It might not. How do we try and retain the level of trade that we've managed to gain in the last 4 weeks? So it's a new set of challenges at the moment. Every week's got a new set of challenges.
The Eat Out scheme is a bit like a Marmite conversation. There's a majority definitely that likes, but there is pockets of the industry that's concerned and asking questions about it, and what exactly helping is cannibalizing your weekend trade, some say. Others says that if we continue this, we'll set an expectation to the consumers because they can't figure out that this is a government-backed scheme. It's the government, that's not their duty to communicate that, and in principle they're just pushing a problem in front of them, the government, some people say.
No, I think you're right there on a few things, Michael. I think people's habits form relatively quickly, actually. We might like to think that we have an individual mindset as human beings, but we don't. As creatures, we're creatures of habit. And actually, if you start coming out Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you're probably going to continue going out Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, because the rest of your week for 4 weeks, 5 weeks has been built around that. You learn habits very quickly. Expectation is part of that as well. You're used to coming in and not paying as much. The price you charge for food in restaurants is already a matter of debate in many places. Is that a £14 dish? Do you charge that for a burger? I think people have now spent 4 or 5 weeks paying 50%. It's going to take a lot of adjustment to what is good value for money, especially with rising food costs. We've already seen that off the back of the pandemic, with certain foods going up in prices. So yeah, from a consumer point of view, I think the longer that goes on, if it is extended, we may be making a rod for our own backs. If we don't have it though, we'd be empty on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday for sure. As a generalised scheme, as a small business, there are government incentives that, as a small business, I'm thankful for. There are schemes that will give people 50% off of their food on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and the government kindly reimburses for that. There are other schemes that mean I don't have to return all my staff to work if they're on furlough. Thankfully, none of ours are. But if we do return them off of furlough and we keep them employed to January, we could take a £1,000 grant from the government. And I believe there's another one that if we employ someone under the age of 24 and we keep them employed, again, if they come off of universal credit, again, we get another grant. Now, as a small business that might employ 3 or 4 people, I mean, we employ just under 20, but as a small business that even employs up to 20 people, how much of an impact is that going to have? If I'd furloughed all my staff and brought them all back, and might be in line for £20,000. interestingly, as a franchise, I didn't actually qualify for grants because we don't pay business rates. So we didn't have any government assistance throughout the pandemic. I look at that, and £20,000, it's £20,000 I wouldn't have if I were in that situation. But I do look at bigger companies. I look at the likes of Nando's, for instance, who have taken the 15% VAT cut and have passed that on to the consumer. Great for the consumer. It does, however, give them an unfair advantage across the market. But then we do live in a free market environment where it is competitive, and nothing can stop them doing that. But it's helped them out a great deal. I look at McDonald's with their 120,000 members of staff, who at £1,000 per person will qualify for £120 million worth of government funding. For members of staff, they would most likely have brought back to work regardless. And then on top of that, we're giving them 15% less VAT to pay, and the taxpayers also paying half the Big Mac meal. McDonald's, these big companies, receiving such unfathomable amounts of money. It's hard to get your head around how small businesses that are genuinely struggling, small businesses that really need the help, aren't getting it. It's a level playing field. McDonald's are getting exactly the same as a small business, but actually these schemes are weighted towards big companies, not small individual independent operators and small businesses.
Yeah, so what you are challenging and question is that, do we actually need to have different models with grants to different types of businesses, because the needs are very different?
I think absolutely. I mean, there's many benchmarks and measuring sticks for the viability of businesses. Number of employees is quite often used. If you're a small, medium business, we know that you have a certain amount of employees. So it could have been limited. Actually, you know what? We will give you £1,000 per employee, but only up to 250 employees. Great. That helps every small business out, and actually it helps McDonald's out to an extent. But that's one benchmark. VAT is another one. Okay, it's fantastic that VAT has been brought down to 5%. That is probably the difference between half of the restaurants around us being open today and not having already shut. That's given us that margin of sort of to operate within, to take those initial losses. Does McDonald's need 15%? Does Nando's need 15% less VAT? I'd argue probably not. People's habitual buying habits mean that McDonald's has had queues around the blocks halfway down the motorway near where I live. They probably didn't need that level of support, and it could have been capped at turnover. It could have been linked to their VAT returns for the last 5 years, anything like that. There are measuring sticks, but I appreciate as a government trying to come up with a policy quickly, it's difficult to find a model that fits all and is fair to all. And as a business, I am grateful for the help we have received. I just feel it in hindsight, which is a wonderful thing. There were perhaps other ways or other incentives.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of writing there's going to be on the wall as furlough stops and business rates kicks in early next year. You have the VAT probably be brought back either to the full 20 or something in between. What kind of impact that's going to have on the industry? And I think we haven't seen anything yet. That's often my own personal view. I think we still have a lot of small businesses will struggle as there's no more cash to hunt in a way and support anywhere.
I think there's been a long-standing campaign to look at VAT in hospitality, especially in the food side of businesses. The inability to reclaim VAT because it doesn't exist on raw products, for instance, means that there's always been an argument that hospitality should be treated differently. I mean, the government is really in an ideal situation where come January it can look at it and say, actually, you know what, hospitality is recovering, but we know you're not quite there yet. January, February, March are the quiet months, but let's increase this to 10%. And then they could maybe increase it to 15 3 months after. Maybe a staggered return would be a more prudent look. There's no need to return it to 20. Most chefs might not remember, but I do, that VAT was only 17.5% once upon a time. So actually there's nothing that says VAT has to be 20. Some businesses qualify for fixed rate at 12.5%. Indeed, a lot of catering companies that only deal in the food side qualify to have their VAT set at 12.5%. They lose the ability to obviously reclaim VAT, but that's a sacrifice a lot of them will make because, as I say, raw products have no VAT. So I think there's a lot the government can do. In terms of businesses surviving and chasing more cash, again, that margin at the moment, that extra 15% has helped us through. Touch wood, I'm very fortunate that my sites, by and large, are operating at good levels of trade. That would mean that if I needed to, I could probably actually pay 20% VAT. That's not an offer to the Chancellor to pay 20% VAT, but I acknowledge that I could if I needed to. What that does mean, though, is actually, I can afford to pay my staff more. I can give them extra hours at the moment to help make up for those of them that maybe were not furloughed through other kitchens before they joined us and have got COVID debt that's sort of following with them, rent arrears and things like that, so we can help pay them a little bit more to deal with those things. I think any company that shouldn't rely on that 15% reduction. We should all be operating on the assumption that it's 20%. And if that means in 4 or 5 months that we've got surplus cash, then that's great. We've either got surplus cash to reinvest in our businesses or help expand or do something positive with, or your prerogative, take it as a profit. But I don't think we should live within our means, and that means we should accept that it will go back up. We shouldn't be using that 15% now as our operating margins, because that means we're going to leave ourselves exposed come January when that does potentially increase.
What have you done besides we were talking about grants and government incentive here? What have you done yourself to say, okay, how do I actually start future-proofing my business? What kind of initiatives have you put in place? Because you've been extremely busy feeding people and also just bringing the business back. Okay,
so we have actually looked at future-proofing in terms of the next few months. Conversations are obviously being had. Is there going to be a second lockdown? Is there going to be a second peak? All these questions, which mean that in 2 months, what do I do if suddenly all my sites that are now fully staffed and fully operational, what happens if they shut down? Again, we are feeding the homeless still. We're feeding them till the end of the year, so I will always find work for my chefs. But in terms of future-proofing the whole business, Deliveroo's done quite nicely during lockdown. I'd have quite liked to pick up shares in their company before COVID hit. We have put together a new concept. It's called dough, as in pizza dough. That's exactly what it is. We've put together a pizza company. We're hard at work at the moment, actually training former rough sleepers down at the food project. We've offered them full-time permanent contracts, again paying Brighton living wage, and we're giving them kitchen training. They're learning their way through KPing, veg prep, and eventually they'll learn how to handcraft pizzas. The idea behind this company is that you can jump on Deliveroo, Just Eat, you can order a pizza from dough. Your pizza will be made by a former rough sleeper. The profits from that company will go back to funding food poverty and homelessness charities across Brighton.
Amazing.
But that's a level of our future-proofing. We're looking at the Deliveroo concept and the fact that deliveries can still take place, which means we can protect jobs. It's obviously not just the homeless people that work in those kitchens. We have other chefs that work alongside them. We have regular staff. So it's a way of actually protecting everyone's jobs. And should the country lock down again, it's a way of the public actually supporting people that are really in need in terms of food banks, through the profits that we donate to producing more meals for them.
And this is operational as it is today?
Not today. We have the pizza ovens in. We're cooking pizzas. We're working closely with a PR person from London that specialises in optimising for Deliveroo and Just Eat. We want to make sure that when we actually launch, that the product is incredibly solid, not just the pizza, but the brand image behind it, to give the project the best chance of survival in what is an incredibly competitive industry to sell takeaway pizzas here in Brighton. Yeah. We're probably about 6 weeks off, so I'd hope by the end of September we'll be operational. We're lucky to have 3 sites that all have pizza ovens, which means our delivery scope stretches from Portslade right the way through to Coldine, Whitehawk, right the way across Brighton. So we can encompass the whole city and hopefully sell some pizzas, keep some people in work, and go on to feed some more people. And
you created a new revenue stream within that as well, and a new business model you normally didn't operate before.
Yeah,
that, which is the dark kitchen
We
model.
Yes, essentially. I mean, we're sat in the Stoneham at the moment. My largest pizza oven is actually in this pub. We could probably push out 24 pizzas every couple of minutes from here if we wanted to. The pizza oven's that large. So not a dark kitchen in a sense. It's fully open to the public. They can come in and order a pizza. And if they come in and order a pizza, again, we do make a donation to a food poverty charity.
Yeah.
So anyone that's been dining with us in the last 2 months, revenue has already gone to produce meals for food banks around Brighton through a local company, community interest company called Give a Fork, which was started by a colleague of mine, Ben. Ben Murray wants hospitality to try and solve the food poverty problem in Brighton by asking chefs like me to produce meals. So the revenue we take from dough produces meals for Ben to take out to various food banks. So yeah, it produces a revenue stream. It's not a profitable revenue stream in a sense. We are a profit-making company, but we operate it as a department within. So we ring-fence the money we make from that. That profit from that part of the company won't go to pay employees or stock for another part, even in the same building. That profit is ring-fenced. So we know exactly where it's going and how many people we're helping.
What is interesting here is that you going beyond that normally what a business owner you take care, which I'm a big believer, and I think that's where many hospitality businesses will go. They will have these different arms of businesses. I'm involved in a business myself in London where we've done similar thing, and it's that thing you do it because you have this hunger to feed people, or you need to help people because you're so close to poverty when you work in hospitality. You're just a step away from the pavement many times because you understand these people, they're living on very, very small money already. You know when they're not surviving, how it is to have that life and helping out in many kind of way. But what I think is interesting is that this thing about, I've been talking to a couple of people, is that how can hospitality be more than ever involved in solving the big problems of the world? So problems around individual people's life, so homelessness, communities issues, planet issues with, environmental catastrophe coming around the corner. How can we, because people eat 3 times a day, and you can really impact people through food.
No, absolutely. I think the industry has an immense responsibility. I don't honestly know. I don't honestly believe it's in the right place at the moment to actually affect that change, though. No. I don't think the industry's ready to try and affect that change. There are fantastic pioneers out there. I mean, we had Doug from Silo here, who opened up Brighton's first ever zero waste restaurant. Doug, in a sense, was a pioneer in zero waste. We've always tried to reduce waste in our kitchens, especially single-use plastic waste. I mean, for instance, if you come into any of my kitchens and look in the sink, you won't find single-use sponges. That's plastic to landfill. We actually grow loofah back on our small holding in Hampshire, and that loofah is then dried out, and we've now got a completely organic, quite abrasive sponge that people can scrub pans with, and then after a day we can pop them in the washing machine and wash them and recycle them. So things like loofah. So I mean, on a small scale, yes, I think it would take high-profile hospitality, the likes of your celebrity chef, your more recognisable face, to start pushing and leading the way on this. Jamie Oliver, again, a bit of a Marmite character to a lot of chefs, has tried tackling childhood obesity, for instance. I think there's a lot of individual responsibility, but I think until hospitality start treating their own people better, I don't really think we have the moral authority to dictate how the world treats other people.
So it's showing the change you want to be, in principle, in any kind of scale you can do it, because everything matters in the end.
Absolutely. The working conditions, that makes it sound like they're in sweatshops at gunpoint. My staff honestly aren't. We have long hours. There's quite often very little thanks in hospitality. The pay isn't great, especially for front of house people. Chefs, to a better extent, have got a skill set, so they get a bit better pay, but there's very little thanks. I always remember an ops manager I had when I headed up that 2 rosette kitchen. I had an ops manager called Stephen, and he took all the chefs aside one day, and he's like, "Listen, guys, no one's ever going to say thank you. There's no magic pat on the back." He said, "But what you've got to understand in hospitality is that you honestly have this ability to change people's lives." He says, probably going to shrug it off and not think too much about it. He said, but people are going to come in today and they're going to break bread and they're going to dine with friends, family. He said, tomorrow, some of them are going to move to Australia, some are going to get hit by a bus, and some of them are just, never going to speak to others again. He said, and they're going to remember this last meal together. And they're not going to remember it for what they spoke about or this. They're going to remember whether or not the food looked pretty on the plate. They're going to remember whether or not the cutlery was straight on the table. He said they won't remember it for those things, but how you treat these people, how you set the table, how you serve them, all these things will create either a positive or a negative experience. If they come in and the table's messy, they might not note that the table's messy, but it impacts on their experience, he says. And you've got this ability to make sure that they leave having this positive experience and positive memories. And yeah, sure enough, I shrugged it off like he said I would, until a few years later when I was running the vineyard. And as a chef, only a few years, but a chef for a few years, I'd escaped Christmas lunch for many years. My first ever Christmas day that I opened was on the vineyard. We lived there and it made sense to open the restaurant. But we opened it for staff and their families. So we filled our restaurant with Sam, my assistant manager, Charlie, who ran our wine tours, and all their families. It was a big extended Christmas lunch. And a few days before Christmas, I'd had Kerry, who was my drinks rep, say to me, I don't suppose I could be cheeky. Could we get a table for Christmas lunch? Kerry's two young sons, Oliver and Louis, 18 and 16, were actually carry-outs at my weddings that we used to do on site. Of course, staff, family, bring them all. And so Kerry came down with Oliver, Louis, Daisy, her 11-year-old daughter, and Mark, her husband. They had Christmas lunch, Table was set perfectly, made a real effort with the food, absolutely loved it. 2 days later, Daisy found her dad passed away on the kitchen floor, quite sadly. Incredibly traumatic for them, really, really awful for the family. But when it came to the wake, they picked the vineyard. And you can tell, I get emotional about this. They picked the vineyard because it was the last place they'd come as a family, and they made really good memories. And actually what Stephen said made such profound sense that I actually tell this story to every single one of my chefs. Even on a Sunday, when that Yorkshire pudding's not sat on the plate properly, move it back, because we need to make this effort. It's our responsibility to people who are probably coming out and actually spending hours, if not days, of their life's wage, their salary on this food. We've got this obligation to them, because actually how we do treat people in hospitality does make the difference. But then the flip side is we're not treating our own people particularly well, which is why we try to do it a bit differently, as I say. And I think when hospitality is a bit more profitable, not that it isn't for some people, we have that obligation to pass that on. There's only so many handbags and pairs of shoes my wife needs. So why aren't we paying our staff that little bit more? Even since the start of lockdown to now, most of my staff, if not all of them, have actually had an increase in their take-home wage.
And what you're playing here is also a bit more like the long game than the finite game, because one of the challenges with hospitality, I personally self-believe, is that you go into with the finite kind of view and profit. Because it's so hard, so you just say, I need to focus on profit. But those things goes hand in hand. It's a bit like a wheel that rolls down the hill.
I don't think there's a single business that's profitable today that started focusing on profit. And if they did, they probably wouldn't be. This industry, more than any other, but in all industry, the most important thing is people. 100%. It's the relationships we form with our staff, with our colleagues, with mentors, with everybody. If we form really positive relationships based on respect, then those staff will stay with me longer. If they stay with me longer, it means we can refine what we're doing. We can then, when we've got good staff and consistent staff, we can then look at our margins, and actually we can work on those, and we can find savings. But savings shouldn't be made in staff. Everyone's got bills to pay and food to put on their table. It's the last place. So we always start with staff. I mean, we're not perfect. We've got sites that we might struggle in, the wrong member of staff for that particular site. All sorts of things impact, but I think getting the right staff and treating everyone with respect and working towards that end goal, it can only be good for a business.
Because it's a bit like investing for your pension. It's compounding over time, because it's trust in principle. It's not about only benefits, it's also about how you treat them, as you say. Very, very spot on. What do you think the future is if you take it down to the independent restaurants, because there's so many different types of food service businesses, catering, so on. But what do you think that the future looks in the next 12 to 18 months when it comes to the independent market? We can stay in Brighton if you want to talk a bit about how do you think this all going to unroll now, and what are we looking at?
I think it's an incredibly turbulent time. I'm fearful for colleagues across the industry. In reality, there are small, large, medium-sized sites right across the board whose margins are so tight, who for whatever reason might have had a drop-off in trade. I think we're going to see closures. I honestly do. That can be anything from pubs through to small restaurants to large restaurants. But we're already seeing it with large chains as well that aren't surviving this period, which is a shame. It really is. But at the same time, that's also opportunity. That means there's vacant sites for other operators that have the ability to expand to take the next step. So yeah, I mean, as the country is sort of sitting in a recession, we'll see how quickly we recover from that. The Eat Out scheme will probably play a large part in keeping the economy sort of moving. But I wouldn't be surprised to see closures.
What about, do you think there's some people that's talked about closure rates up to 60, 70%? Do you think that's where we are now? That was before we opened. And now I think some people are going down to 45, 50, 40. That's different.
You know what, when the UK decided to vote to leave the European Union, it was a week before Jamie Oliver blamed Brexit and shut half his restaurants. It was the first week of the COVID lockdown when Laura Ashley decided that it had ruined retail for them. I think, given the bounce back that we have had, and I do accept that is largely due at the moment to the Eat Out scheme, but given the bounce back we have had and the level we are operating at, I think if independents don't survive now, they probably had poor financial management before. Not all of them, before people start bombarding me with references. But there's got to be some give and take. What happens if you have a quiet week? What happens if you have a quiet month? What happens if this or that? We all need flexibility in our business model. Otherwise, it's not a business model at all. So if we haven't got that flexibility, then there's something wrong. I'd say that if we were saying there were going to be closure rates of 40% before, they're probably still 40% now. It's always hard to kind of put a figure on that, isn't it? But I think that if businesses are failing now, they were probably going to fail regardless. Okay, there will be some casualties that are directly because of COVID, but I think if they fail now, you do have to look at whether or not they would have failed regardless. And
within all that, and you are going out on this journey yourself as well as a business owner, and working both, trying to launch new things, do non-profit things. You're suddenly running many platforms. How do you said yourself, it's long hours in the moment, as always is in hospitality, but how do you keep yourself sane in all that? How do you keep yourself focused, feel that you have the right energy? How do you switch off?
I don't switch off. I think this sounds incredibly crazy. I actually have an incredibly keen interest in politics. That keeps me sane in hospitality, because as crazy as hospitality seems at times, actually you only have to look at the political spectrum for 5 minutes to think that actually you work with the sanest bunch of people out there. So yeah, I have my outside interests. I have my children, my wife, and bits at home. I make sure I get family time. That's really important. Just like my staff have their 3 days off a week, I try and make sure I have at least one full day off a week. Ideally 2. More often than not, I get 2. Occasionally, I'm lucky enough to get 3. A couple of half days, something like that. I make sure I get some away time. I'm very fortunate that with my keen interest, I say politics, but it's also community. I think it's a fair way of putting it. With the work we're doing on non-profits and homelessness, that spills over into community. So I find myself, meeting with local councillors, local MPs, discussing the food poverty situation and how we can better serve our communities. So actually, it keeps me sane because I'm not entirely hospitality focused. Hospitality is now, like Ben, has taken on a new challenge within the city and kind of redefining our role in the community.
Yeah, that's super interesting because what you get from doing these things, I know that for myself, it's an undescribable energy and focus on the rest, because that becomes so important that you can contribute to that. So you actually make sure that your other part of your business and life is in order, because if you drop that over there, you can't do that. And I've heard that other people said that as well.
I will still cook a service in every single one of my kitchens every week. I was in... I was in here on Sunday. I floated in on Sunday. I did Monday here this week. I did a full service. I always make sure that I'm working alongside my staff, especially at the moment, because these poor guys, this eat out scheme means that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we're staffed like it's a weekend. Not one of them has actually managed to go out and eat out at half price. We have actually asked them where their favourite restaurant is, and we're actually giving all of our staff a £100 voucher to go and eat in the restaurant on us on one of the other nights a week when there's not a discount, just so they've actually had some sort of a perk from it. My staff need to know that we appreciate them and the effort they're making. So yeah, we've made that small gesture to them. It's about balance, really.
And we quickly forget that again. Hospitality, thinking about taking care of our people again, like, they are already on a low salary compared to many others, but they can't go out and enjoy that because, of course, they need to be at work now.
Yeah, it's almost like Christmas syndrome all over again, isn't it? Everyone comes out for a wonderful Christmas in a pub, but they actually forget that all the people serving them have actually postponed their Christmas to make their Christmas more special.
Yeah.
And it's the same Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I think I've read several articles this week about the stress levels for hospitality and how people have higher expectations. I heard the argument of, well, if you can serve 150 people on Saturday or Sunday, why can't you feed 150 people on Monday or Tuesday? But quite simply put, people's actual daily habits are different on those days of the week. On a Saturday or Sunday, they can come in any time from 12 till 9. And we spread those people over an entire day. On a Monday or Tuesday or a Wednesday, for instance, they're going to work. They're not coming in. They're actually coming in 6:30 to 7:30 at night to eat their dinner. So we're trying to feed 150 people in that bottleneck. So it is incredibly stressful. And as much as people sort of point out that everyone's trying their best, it's busier times. Not all the public, but there have been some people that are a little unforgiving. I think people need to appreciate what hospitality are doing. These staff are in here every single day, working in close proximity to lots and lots of strangers, and that's a risk. That's a risk they're taking. It's not like any other job where you can distance yourself to an extent. These people are literally in daily close proximity to hundreds of different people, taking that risk back to their families. And people need to kind of take a step back and remember that it's not like being a frontline nurse. I'm not taking anything away from that, but hospitality really have sort of stepped up and are really trying to help people get back to a new normal.
I would totally agree with you. And in the end of the conversation, I always ask for top 3 advice to other leaders out there. What is your top 3 advice, thinking about where we are right now as an industry? What would you like people to reflect and think about as leaders out there?
Individual responsibility is probably the biggest thing. I literally came from a lunch meeting where I was talking about individual responsibility and it not being an industry-wide thing. We can all set examples on a macro level. People are the most important asset our companies and our industry have. Invest in them. We have to invest in our people and treat them better. If that means we have to put the prices up on food to be able to pay them, put something at the bottom of your menu and just say, you may notice prices have increased by 5% this week. This is so that we can pay our staff the living wage. I can't think of a single person that would think that's a horrible thing. And 3, you got our boots on the ground sometimes. I will always come into my kitchen and my cook because I need to know what's going on in a sense, but we have to lead from the front. Leaders don't tell people what to do. Leaders show people what to do. We have to lead by example. If that means that a restaurant manager rolls up his sleeves and goes and actually does a shift on the floor, or an owner like myself who happens to be a chef goes in and cooks at a stove and bits, we have to be there kind of on the cook line with our staff. and be part of it with them. So yeah, absolutely. It's treat your people right and make sure you're connected to your business. Know it from the ground up, especially now, and set that example.
It's so interesting. I think you're all great advice, all of them, but especially the one, get out in the front line and be involved, because also the people I've heard that has, they're bouncing back. This is exactly what the CEO is doing. They have, again, redefined their habits. That they said they had some very bad habits about meetings and behind the desk. They're actually out there now serving that pint, doing that thing to understand how it works. And they one of them had been a KP through lockdown, and he says, like, I was shocked about what I learned. I thought that was not how we did it. And it's my fault, he said. My responsibility, because I haven't really cared enough to go out and look.
Yeah.
And it's interesting.
I'd imagine there's probably not a single head chef out there that in the last year or two hasn't looked at an invoice that's come in and said, how much does that cost? Had no idea we were paying that for that. Now, that's the head chef. I'm once removed. Imagine what would happen if I looked at invoices. But I look at my invoices almost monthly. I will know if we can switch to a cheaper supplier for a particular line. And it's because we're so involved and so hands-on that means we're more viable. Yeah. If you're not hands-on and don't understand how your business is operating on the front line, then all you're doing is chasing profit. And as we've already said, that's not how viable businesses operate.
Amazing. Ed, thank you so much for your time, and are sending you and all your projects and your team members all the power, energy, and love they need to succeed with this. And I'm sure that's going to be people reaching out to you. So where can they find you if they want to reach out to? Where it's best?
I live on Twitter, like most people, most chefs. They can always find me on Twitter as Ethicurean Ed. Confusingly with 2 Ds.
Yeah.
But I'm always there, and I'm always happy to interact with people. So find me, say hello, and we'll
put it in the show notes and some more links and so on, so people can find all about you.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Ed, for coming on.
It's been a pleasure, Michael. Thank you.
Wow, Ed. I'm still so overwhelmed and grateful at the same time how many people you'd helped during the last months. You and your teams are mavericks, so keep on going, doing good through food. If you would like to get inspired by similar stories, you should tune in to episode 13 and 14, Staying True to Moshimo with co-founder Carl Jones. It's a part 1 and 2, and it's another Brighton maverick doing good through food. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please give us a like, share, rate, or subscribe to one of our channels. Tune in next time for another interview, and in the meantime, find out more about us and subscribe to the community and download free leadership tools at hospitalitymavericks.com. Thanks for listening, and be maverick.